Hey, Adam.
That's good. Well, welcome everybody. My name's Adam Godet. I am a woodworker here in Washington, D.C. I have a small little garage shop in Capitol Hill neighborhood, and I've been making furniture pretty seriously since about 2010. And I also have a line of home goods, cutting boards, coasters, that kind of thing. You can find those small items all over the city, primarily at Shop Made in DC, the Portrait Gallery Museum gift store, and a little store called the Neighbor Goods in the Shaw neighborhood. We've done a series of workshops this summer of 2020. So if you're tuning in later than that, you know what a weird time it's been, and we've done these very physical things like woodworking in an online scenario, and it's been a lot of fun. So if this is the first time video today, we're talking about mortise and tenon joinery, which is a little bit more advanced. I would encourage you, if this is your first video and you don't have a lot of woodworking background, to go and check out some of the earlier videos where we covered some of the more basic stuff. So we have a good video on wood as a medium and the science of wood, as well as more common joinery, so dowel joinery and using screws to join boards and things like that. So the purpose of this is just to give everybody a little bit of a taste of very basic woodworking skills and some familiarity so you can get in your own shop or the Maker Hub and play around with a little bit of knowledge. A lot of this stuff has to be hands-on. So if you're going to make something, don't let this be your only exposure to it, but it certainly is meant as a strong introduction. So with that said, we can dive right into mortise and tenon joinery. The mortise and tenon joint is ancient. The Egyptians used this. We've been using it for hundreds of years. If you look around at any well-made piece of furniture, especially tables, side tables, it almost certainly has some type of mortise and tenon joinery. A mortise and tenon is very basically a, um, a male-female kind of joint here. So we have um, this would be what you would consider like an apron for a table, and this would be like a table leg. And I'm getting a little bit of glare from this light here, so I'm going to turn around. Um, there we go. So this again is the receiving piece for this joint, and it comes in like this, and you're able to join two pieces of wood together in a very reliable, stable manner. There are all sorts of ways that they make this joint. You will see this where the joint actually goes all the way through the mortise and is exposed on the other side. That's called a through mortise and tenon. Sometimes that tenon coming through the other side. So if it comes through here like this, it may have a key or something that locks it in a really ornate fashion. We're not going to cover any of those joints today. I can show any of you in the Maker Hub sometime how that's done. You can also find other examples online. But I just point that out to show you that there's different kinds of this joint. And today we're going to cover just how to do the very basic mortise and tenon joint, which is extremely versatile and used all over. I mentioned tables at the opening of this, and that's where you'll see this joint very commonly. This is basically what you would see if you imagine a side table. Um, it has four legs and four aprons going all the way around. The aprons join to the table legs with a mortise and tenon joint almost all the time. Um, this joint does require some specialty tools. You can do it with a minimal number of tools and very basic things, and I will show you that a little bit. But I have some of the more advanced tools here, which make it a little bit easier to use, easier to do. And so I'm going to go ahead and just kind of familiarize everybody with all those tools and all the different ways of doing it this morning. There's also a very expensive tool, which if you are at all in the YouTube atmosphere of woodworking or anything like that, you've probably heard of. It's called the Festool Domino Joiner. I have one. It's a great tool, and I highly recommend you use it. It makes your woodworking projects a lot faster and is a lot easier. But just in the same way that we learned how to do arithmetic with pencil and paper before we learned how to use a calculator in most cases, I think it's advantageous to go ahead and learn how to do the classic mortise and tenon joint using hand tools, um, so that you understand what's involved and how it can be done. So with that said, are there any questions before I dive into this? Okay, so just like any good 30-minute cooking program, I have, and by the way, I know this class is on the calendar for 2 hours. It's probably going to go about 30 minutes max. And like I started to say, like any good cooking program, it happens in 30 minutes. Some of the stuff has been pre-prepared. so that you don't need to watch me do all of the nitty gritty chisel work and that kind of stuff, which, unless you're really into like ASMR videos, is not really what we're here for. So with the basics, again, you have two pieces that you have to cut out, and it's the tenon, which is this piece here, and the mortise, which is essentially a square hole. And we're going to do that using a handsaw. We're going to cut the tenon first, and we're going to do that with a handsaw, and then we're going to cut the mortise. And for the mortise, we're going to use a drill and some chisels. Now, again, if you had access to an entire wood shop, you could cut tenons with a bandsaw or a table saw or anything else. But at the end of the day, a lot of woodworking really comes down to layout and then waste removal. So once you understand what the joint is and you're able to reliably lay it out on your workpieces, the rest of it is just removing all the stuff you don't want around it. And doing that with hand tools is really satisfying. It's a really safe way to work, and it's a great way to get started. Hand tools are a lot more accessible for a lot of us than power tools, and it's how I started. So I have laid out the tenon on this piece with a marking knife, and I'm going to go ahead and walk through that process with those tools again, and then I'll highlight them in a pencil so we can all see them, and then I'll go ahead and cut the joint. And I will go ahead and do that. Again, any questions you have, just go ahead and jump in. We've kept these very informal all summer. I know we have some new folks on, so it's a wood shop, it's not a library. You can, shout out, do whatever you need to do. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about some dimensions and some ratios on your tenon. Typically, your tenon and your tenon is going to be about a third of the width of your workpiece. So common stock is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 3/4 of an inch to a full inch. This piece happens to be about 7/8. So I just sort of eyeballed it. And you're also going to want to mark the center line. And that's going to become important when we go to line this up with its mating joint, the mortise. So the first thing you're going to do, step one in the layout, is to mark the center line on your piece. You can do that by, just simply measuring. And you see this is just shy of 7/8. So you're going to set your ruler to half of 7/8, which is going to be 7/16. I've covered this in earlier sessions, but quick arithmetic trick: if you ever need to half a fraction, just double the denominator, and that'll get you very, very close. It'll actually be the right answer. But oftentimes you'll find that when you measure things, it's just a hair one way or the other. To make sure you have a center line on a board, you're just going to mark it from both sides. So in this case, I would mark here, doop, and then come back around and do the other side. And then if it happened to be slightly off, it would be right in the middle of those two hash marks. So you've marked your center line. Now you're going to want to mark the piece into roughly even thirds. Okay, this isn't rocket science, so it just needs to be roughly even thirds. I like to do that using a marking gauge, and this is adjustable in a lot of different directions, and it has a wheel on it. So it's a really handy way to do it, and it leaves a nice crisp line. You could also do it with a ruler or a small square and a marking knife or a pencil. Everybody's going to have access to a pencil. That's a great way to work. The sharper the pencil, the better, but you're never going to get any sharper than a marking knife. If you don't have a specialty marking knife, X-Acto knives work really well for this. And the benefit of those is you can just toss the blades when you're done. These sharpen pretty easily, but regardless, you're going to get the most accurate line with a marking knife. So again, we're going to divide this up into thirds, and I'll set my marking gauge to do that. And so we're going to go make a line here, making another line here. And so now we've divided this into thirds. I'm going to highlight that with my pencil here, very sharp pencil, and just drag it through these grooves. Easier said than done when you're on camera. All right, and so you can see, divided that into thirds. And we're going to remove this little piece here and this little piece here. The next thing you're going to need to do is set your depth, because this is going to go into a workpiece. So again, your depth is going to be an important, kind of a critical measurement, and you're going to want to go as deep as you can into the receiving piece without interfering with other joints. So if this were a table leg, you would have a joint coming in from this side, but you'd also have one coming in from this side. And you have to account for the material inside those two 90-degree joints meeting. So in all my conversations with the old timers, it's like, well, how deep do you go into the joint? And it's like, they always just say, as deep as you can without interfering with the other piece, which is, I guess, pretty good advice, but I guess I was hoping for something more specific. I just never got it. But anyway, for the sake of this example, we're just going to go about 1 inch deep. So again, you just take your ruler. These little 4-inch squares are super handy to have in the shop, but any ruler or any square that you have will do. These just work well because you can use them with one hand. And if you're doing a demonstration, you can even do it with the camera in front of you. So you can mark that line there. And it's okay if this one's in pencil. We'll come back and hit it with a marking knife later. There, so we've marked the depth, so we know where we're stopping this joint, which will become really important when we start using the saw. Now, the next thing we're going to do is mark on the sides of the board, sides of the tenon, where we're going to cut. And we're going to use the marking gauge again, and we're going to do that. We're going to leave the setting exactly the same, so the piece is right where it was, and we're going to mark that line there, mark it on this side, flip it around, same thing, same thing, same, and I'll highlight in pencil again. All right, there we go. So now you can see we've basically got 3 sides of this board marked out where we're going to cut. The last line is the depth mark along this broad face of the board. And we're just going to take our little 4-inch square. I'm going to move myself off camera here for a second. And we will line up those pencil marks. And this one you're going to want a marking knife for, and that'll become apparent when I go to cut that piece out. And we're going to do both sides. And just highlight that. All right, so we can see there. All right, now, any questions so far? This is pretty straightforward. We're just drawing lines on a board. This is now where it gets fun, and this is the performance aspect. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this. I'm going to move the camera around a little bit so we can get a better angle. And then I'll show you the 3-step process to cutting one of these sides, and you can see how it's done. So I'll go ahead and set this in the clamp here. And if the camera view gets it all difficult to see, just somebody jump on and let me know. But I'm going to use this is a back saw or a tenon saw. It's this is called a Western style saw. You can also use a Japanese pole saw, which looks like this. The difference, the Japanese saws have a thinner metal, and they actually cut on the pull stroke. Western back saws cut on the push stroke. I'm going to cover a few hand saw basics here too, because we haven't covered them yet. A lot of people get very frustrated with, I'm going to pop back on camera here. A lot of people get very frustrated with hand saws, most often because they're not very sharp and they kind of wander around in the cut and they don't do a good job. And a lot of time that's user error, but a lot of time it is just that the saw is very dull and maybe it came from a hardware store or something like that. But if you get a good specialty hand saw that's sharp, it should cut reliable, it should cut straight, and it should be a real joy to use. The other thing you want to do is hold it properly. One thing that people do, a common mistake, is they hold the saw too tight. So I'm pointing this at the screen in a kind of a threatening manner. It's not meant to be that way. But you'll see when I squeeze the saw really tight, it wants to tilt. It wants to come in. You want to hold it really lightly. This back piece here on the back saw, it's meant to keep the blade straight. It also is a weight so that the saw wants to stay up and down, plumb. And so your job as the user, all of us have heard somebody at some point say, let the tool do the work. And really, you want to hold it super, super light, like holding an egg, basically. You just need to hold it tight enough to maintain control, but you don't want to squeeze it at all. Squeezing it, again, tilts the blade, kind of ruins your day in terms of joinery. The final thing I'll point out is that your pointer finger goes like this. And I'm not sure why exactly, but most handles are not big enough for you to comfortably fit your hand into the entire handle. Of course, depends on the saw and depends on your hand. But they are designed for the finger to be out this way. And what I'm told is that doing this and setting your hand in this way sort of helps the brain think in a straight pattern. I don't know if that's true, but I buy it. Finally, your arm is going to move in a straight pattern with your elbow close to your side. So kind of like a train locomotive, kind of has this motion. You're not going up and down like the train locomotive, but just straight forward and back. So, okay, I have procrastinated long enough on talking about hand saw basics. I now have to cut a straight line. When we cut the tenon, you'll notice I have the board tilted away from me. And that's because I need to look at these two lines simultaneously, the one going down and the one going across. And so by tilting the board at sort of 30 degrees this way, I'm able to see both lines as I'm cutting simultaneously. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And here we go. So to start the cut, you just want to kind of come at it very, very lightly. You can actually put your thumb right up against the blade, and your thumb is curved, and the part of the blade that cuts is all the way down here. So as long as your thumb is, it can be very low on the blade, and the curve of your thumb will actually move it away from the sharp bits. So it's a good way to start your cut. Move the camera so you can see my arm a little bit here too. So you can see that I've cut that line now and come across the top. And now I'm going to turn it around the other way so that I can do the same thing on the other side. All right, so now I've cut that other side. Now you can imagine in the middle here, I've cut it down on this angle, and I've cut it down on this angle. So there's still some material here in the middle, and the easiest way to cut that is to just come straight in from the top. So we've cut all the way around that side. I'm gonna go ahead and do the other side. I'm gonna do this one without commentary, and I will move the camera back so you can see more of the whole picture here. In terms of saw basics. One of the things I'll point out here is that I put an X on both of the parts that are going to be waste. And if you're making the cut and you're not feeling like super confident about hitting that line dead on, you can cut a little ways away from it. And we can always come at that with a file or a plane or even sandpaper and and tighten it up, or we can make the mortise bigger because we're still going to cut the mortise. But cutting on the waist side of the line is always the way to cheat if you need to. All right, so now we've cut away the material on both the shoulders. We just need to remove along this baseline here. And to do that, we're going to make what's called, they call this a 3rd degree cut in fancy hand tool woodworking, but it basically just means the best cut possible. So you remember that we used a marking knife to mark this line, and I said that would become apparent why later. And that's because right now I'm going to take this board and I'm going to create a little channel with a chisel for the saw blade to fit, because we want this line to be as perfectly straight as possible. And creating that little channel with the chisel is going to give us the best chance possible to do that. So I'm also going to plug in my laptop. All right. So do this, you can just drag the chisel along the board and it will just catch that line. And we'll give it a couple taps. Do it again. Just drag that chisel, you'll catch the line you scored earlier. And then take the chisel, and we'll just sort of wedge it in there. One of the videos we did earlier this summer was on sharpening, and having a sharp chisel, having sharp tools in general is one of the best methods for overall success in the shop. So if you're going to get into some projects, again, and this is your first video, check out sharpening basics. All right, so I will now go ahead and do the same thing I did with the handsaw basically. For this cut, I'm going to go perfectly flat, and I'm just going to follow this channel. And
Adam, could you move the camera down just a little bit so we can?
Totally.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
Is that better? Thank you. Thanks, Don. All right. So, and then our little shoulder comes off. And we'll do exactly the same thing on the other side. You'll see it really just takes one whack with the chisel. You don't need to hammer away at it too bad. You can if you want to, but it's not really going to help. Might help with stress and frustration. Okay. All right. So, and there we go. We now have a tenon. You can see this needs a little bit of cleanup, just where the last little bit of wood was hanging on. We can do that with a chisel. And to do that, I'm just going to scrape along the edge here. Both sides. And we now have a tenon. Now you'll notice the one I cut on this side is smaller, and we can come back and do that. But basically all you're gonna do is cut 2 vertical lines here and then remove it. But I wanna make sure that we take some time and I show you how to cut the mortise, since having tenons and no mortises would help no one. So I'm back on camera. To do the mortise, again, you're gonna wanna make that center line on your workpiece, which was step 1 when we did the tenon up here, you'll see. And basically when these guys come together, you're going to take those center lines and match them up. And then you'll mark out from the center line, equally divide so that your mortise fits in there. And you can do that again with the marking knife or the marking gauge, pencil, anything really. And once those lines are scored, we're just going to take a drill. And like I said before, a lot of woodworking is waste removal. I'm getting this terrible glare from this light. Let me turn it off. We're going to remove all the stuff in the middle there, just the opposite of what we do with the tenon, moving stuff from the outside. And we'll take a drill and a chisel and remove that material, and then the joints will fit together. So we go ahead and get the drill. It's a good point in time to talk a little bit about drill bits. I've mentioned this when we did the dowel thing, dowel demonstration. But drill bits come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. For woodworking, best drill bits are brad point bits, and they have this very sharp point here, and they have these scoring edges here, so they cut very clean lines. Standard drill bit is great for everyday use, cut through metal, cut through wood, plastic, pretty much anything, if you have enough patience. But these brad point bits are really good when you're trying to do precise work, and that's what we're doing today. You're going to want to select the right size drill bit, and basically the best advice here is to use the biggest drill bit you can. That still gives you a little bit of margin of error within your mortise. Now, having a center line helps because you can put the drill bit nearest that line and get as much material out with the drill bit as you can. But you're going to want to come in there with a chisel, and if your drill bit's too big, you're going to have too big of a joint, and it's not going to be a very strong joint. Mortise and tenon joints are glue joints, so they need to be pretty tight fit for the joint. Now, one of my favorite old-timer sayings was, I asked this guy, Frank Klaus, who's a brilliant woodworker, Mr. Klaus, like, how do I know when the mortise and tenon joint is just the right fit? Because if it's too tight, you can split the wood, and wood moves over time, and so it can swell up and cause problems. And he said, you want it tight enough so that what do you say? So tight, not so tight that you need a hammer, not so loose that you could put them together with your hat. So somewhere between a hammer and a hat level of pressure, which is really hard to describe, but if you do it long enough, it starts to make sense. So it needs to be a tight fit that you can pull apart and push together with your hands, essentially. Frank is an old Austrian man and learned the trade the classic way from his dad. So anyway, I'm not positive what size drill bit this is because like a lot of things in the shop, it's just easier to eyeball it. So I'll go ahead and zoom in here, and I think we can all see what I'm doing. Is that a pretty decent view? So basically, I'm going to orient the drill bit right around in the center and give myself, maybe a 1/16 of an inch or a millimeter on all sides that I can. And I like to run the drill bit in reverse with these brad points first, and it'll kind of score the material. And that way you're not getting a bunch of tear out and ugliness. Well, you still might get some. Oh, before I go too far, we talked a little bit about depth with these, and we're going to want to mark on our drill how deep we want this hole. And measuring is really important in the shop, but sometimes you can measure more accurately with things other than a ruler. And because we have a workpiece here and we know exactly how long it is, we don't need to mess around with measuring with a ruler and then trying to make sure we get that measurement just right. So let's put a piece of tape on the drill bit, and that will also help us clear the chips as we get close to our depth stop. Come out here all the way to the bottom. And we'll hit the one in the middle. So at this point, you're going to have about 85-90% of the material out of your way. The next step is, and you can see I was a little off on the center line of that middle one that I did last, but I'm still within the mortise line, so it's okay. And that's why you use the slightly undersized drill bit. So now it's just a matter of some finesse work with some chisels. And as I've said plenty of times this summer, sharp tools are your friend. So we also talked about grain structure and wood science in earlier sessions. And the grain on this wood is moving this way. And there's a chance when we come in with a chisel on this side that it's going to want to split along those grain lines. Those are the ways in which wood wants to cleave away. So the smart thing to do to mitigate against that is to go ahead and hit that grain perpendicularly first with the chisel. And we're going to go ahead and do that. And then when we come in for the sides, we're going to come in very gently and slowly so that we don't jack up our piece. And I'm going to try and raise this up a little bit here before I go any farther. So here we go. Hopefully that's a better view. All right. So I'm going to hit these, the top and bottom first. And you're not going to go all the way through on this first pass. This is going to be a multi-step process. And now when I come in with the chisel, I'm going to come in as close to the center as I can and remove as little material as I can at a time. Because again, I don't want to split anything. And the more waste I have out of the middle and the less waste I remove in one pass, the less dangerous it is. In fact, you don't even need to hit it all the time. You can just use hand pressure. Clear that out. So you can see we're making pretty good progress here. A few more taps with the chisel and we'll be pretty much there. This is the point in YouTube where they would go into like, 8x speed, but we don't have that luxury. So I'll just work as quickly as I can. Okay. All right. So we're just about there. If I was making a piece of furniture with this, I'd probably clean it out a little bit more, but for the sake of demonstration and y'all's weariness with watching me chisel probably, I'm gonna go ahead and end it there. So we really just have a few more relatively easy steps at this point, and we're gonna cut the tenon down to size so that it fits in there. Well, like I said before, in woodworking, there's lots of measuring, but sometimes you don't really need to use any measuring tools. We're just gonna hold the tenon because the tenon obviously is much bigger than the mortise that we cut. So we're gonna go ahead and just hold it up against there, and with a pencil, It's a miracle I didn't misplace it during the class. With a pencil, we'll just mark the top piece and the bottom piece of that mortise on there. And we will take a ruler as soon as I find it again. Having a messy workbench is like kind of a requirement for a woodworker. I don't have my ruler handy, so I'm just going to go ahead and mark a straight line across here, and same here. And I'll bring this back to the vise. And we're just going to cut straight down on these lines. And cut the waste out this way. And then moment of truth. All right, so our tenon is actually a little bit too fat, so we'll clean that up with a hand plane. It's always better to have them be a little bit bigger than you need, because you can always remove a little bit material. You can actually add material too if you cut your tenons too thin. But I'd always say, like I said before, if you're going to cheat, then go ahead and cheat on the waist side of the line. So you can see our pencil lines are still there. And we'll just take a hand plane. This is a rabbiting block plane for anybody who's interested.
You move the camera down?
Yep, thank you.
Awesome, thank you.
Yep. So this just removes a little bit of material. And then I'm going to get a file too, so you can see with a slightly more common tool. So you can use a wood file like one of these. It's kind of thing it's a little more difficult with sandpaper because it's hard to maintain a flat reference surface and you can round your pieces over. We're still not quite there. And here we go. So still needs a little bit more work, but rather than keep going when in little bits, I think that's good enough for demonstration purposes. And that, my friends, is a mortise and tenon joint and how you cut it. Anybody have any questions on any of that? Hopefully that was pretty clear.
You were good.
So I will mention, I mentioned in the opening, there's a domino festool domino joiner. And the way that works is it's basically a tool that cuts mortises they're round. So this is the tenon that they sell. It's proprietary that they make and sell. But what it does is it cuts mortises like this basically in the time it takes you to get your chisel, you have a mortise already cut with the tool, and you cut one of those mortises on each side of the pieces that you're joining. So in this case, you would cut, instead of this tenon here, you'd have a mortise here and the mortise here, and then your tenon would fit in between and join the pieces together. So these tenons fit into a piece like this, and it's super simple and really quick. But again, that's like learning how to do math with a calculator before you've learned what it all means and what the principles are behind it. So, all right. Again, floor is open for any questions, any general woodworking questions while I'm here. I'm happy to answer them. Anything on mortise and tenon joinery. If you want to make fun of my sawing technique, floor is open.
This is great. Thanks so much, Adam. Man, I definitely think we should do a hand plane workshop sometime.
Okay, yeah, totally. That is one where I will describe it the best I can, and I have some good ideas on that. But that is a feel thing. So, but yeah, I'm happy to do that. Probably like 10 or 15-minute hand plane demo. I can introduce all the different hand planes. That might be helpful. There's like a dozen of them.
Any other questions, guys?
Not for me, thank you.
Good to see you, Ashley.
You too.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Adam. Yeah, I'm really excited to try out this stuff in the Maker Hub, especially once we can get people back in there, this being 2020 and all. We've got these tools in the Maker Hub. We've got the planes, and we actually have that same saw. So
Awesome.
Yeah. And Adam, can you tell us again where we can find your stuff?
Sure. Yeah. So again, my name's Adam Godet. I'm a woodworker here in DC. You can find my work at the Shop Made in DC stores, the Portrait Gallery Museum gift shop, the Neighbor Goods in Shaw neighborhood. You can also check out my website, which is godetfurniture.com, Godet, furniture.com. And I have some blogs and stuff on there. I'm on Instagram and the usual socials. So reach out, get in touch if you have any questions. I'm happy to help you wherever I can, and have fun in the shop.